much for having me. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share what my research team and I are learning about creating data systems for public health research in underserved communities with highly vulnerable populations. And while most of the examples that I'm going to talk about today are taken from my research in South Africa, I think that there are some strategies that we've used that could be extended to other international and domestic contexts. So I hope that you'll see those linkages as well. I want to talk a little bit about our team's data evolution. And I would say that much of this evolution has been driven by the complexity of the research that we're conducting in the field. And often we've been forced to innovate out of necessity. And we certainly can't call all these innovations our own. I think they've really been driven by an incredible team of interdisciplinary experts, of which I would not call myself one of those. And very important on our team include academic librarians. So thank you to all of you. So I'd like to begin by orienting you towards our public health research approach. The type of research that we conduct is primarily behavioral research with human participants. This research focuses on generally the question, how can we support the resilience of families affected by HIV, especially in communities where there are generalized epidemics and that are typically highly deprived in other ways. For example, our team is developing interventions to prevent poor psychological outcomes among children orphaned by AIDS, as well as living through parental HIV illness. We're also developing interventions to address HIV risk behaviors among adolescents, one of the fastest growing populations being infected by HIV globally. So what I want to emphasize is that this type of research takes particular care, both in regards to collection of primary data, the protection of data, which is highly sensitive, and also the complexity of collecting data in fieldwork contexts that can be challenging. Often in the communities that we work, there's distrust. Distrust, often for justifiable reasons of outsiders, including distrust of researchers. So good data systems, I think, are critical to good ethical practice in research. And many of the themes around this have been explored in this excellent special issue shown on your right in the Journal of Empirical Research on Human Research Ethics, shown here. So because the populations that we work with are highly vulnerable, for example, children as well as adults infected with HIV, we use participatory and community-engaged research methods. We use these methods to formulate our research agendas. We use them to implement our studies in the field, and we also use these community-engaged approaches to disseminate our findings. So here on the left, you can see a picture of our teen advisory group, who we meet regularly. They advise us on all aspects of our research approach, including our questionnaires and also our data collection systems. And on your right, you can see how we involved participants in the process of disseminating findings from our studies. For example, in one of our previous studies, we found stigma to be a major issue, and participants guided us in filming, producing, and editing a documentary film that provided their perspectives on these issues, as well as integrated our research findings. Another hallmark of our research approach is to find ways to rapidly translate science into policy and practice. A widely cited statistic by Ballas and Bowen and Grant is the lag time of 17 years to translate bench science into policy and practice. Because of the urgency of the issues that we work on, HIV and AIDS, we can't wait that long. As such, we formulate our research aims for studies with policymakers and practitioners prior to even submitting grant applications. We work with them. So prior to implementing our studies in the field, we consult regularly with these stakeholders to try to make sure that once we get the findings, we can rapidly disseminate them. So here again, robust data systems are vital. They really help us translate science into action on the ground. Good data systems allow us to gather data faster, more robustly, with higher quality, and to rapidly clean and analyze. And we've learned a lot of lessons along the way, but one of the things that I think our team is most proud of is that our research has highlighted the issues of mental health among children and their families affected by HIV, and that's been integrated into national level policy and practice in terms of the response in South Africa. So what I want to now give you is a snapshot of the type of research that we do. And I think that this will help set the stage for some of the challenges that we've encountered as we've tried to formulate robust data systems. As I have mentioned before, we focused our research in South Africa, and this is the country with the largest number of people living with HIV in the world. And we purposefully work in South African communities that are hardest hit by the epidemic. The communities that are hardest hit by HIV are also not surprisingly poor, marginalized, and face a number of other issues. A common theme in these communities is the complex syndemic of issues that they face, of which HIV is only one. Here you can see a picture of a public health campaign message painted on the side of a building from one of our research sites in KwaZulu-Natal. The sign says, "Let us be aware of HIV, guns, and speed. All kill." Indeed, I think the sign highlights 3 of the major causes of death in this site: road traffic accidents, violence, either through guns or knives, often related to crime, and HIV. And I'm going to come back to this issue of safety and how this has impacted the development of our data systems a little bit later. I also want to take you through a snapshot of the nature of data that we have uncovered and the types of studies that we have conducted in South Africa. So over the past 10 years of research in South Africa, we've worked in both urban and rural locations. We collected a range of data, including qualitative data, all primary data. So qualitative data might include things like audio, cross-sectional quantitative survey data, and longitudinal survey data. We collected data from both adults and children who I think come with their own complexities in data collection, and at times family data, so we would get data from multiple family members. And we always work in a community setting, which can be highly unpredictable, and what this means for data systems is that we need to choose data systems that are flexible, that can respond to the types of situations that we face. So I want to take you through some of the main findings of our studies. One of the major findings is around health disparities. We found that children orphaned by AIDS or those living with an HIV-sick adult, such as a surviving parent or a surrogate caregiver, face major psychological disparities. You can see in the red bars that children affected by HIV were at drastically higher risk for PTSD, suicide, and anxiety. And our findings have been mirrored across studies in other countries. And this theme of health disparities around mental health also extends to their parents and surviving caregivers. These caregivers reported startling rates of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And you can see some of our published papers on this topic on your right. A second theme that we uncovered from our findings was a documentation of an emerging syndemic around HIV and poor mental health. We found that multiple exposures to HIV have additive risk for poor mental health outcomes. So, for example, here you can see rates of anxiety among parents affected by HIV in some way. They were either living with HIV or caring for a child orphaned by AIDS, or both. And adults who were caring for a child orphaned by AIDS while living with HIV were at drastically higher risk for reporting anxiety. And in our multivariate analysis, what we found was that these adults were 5 times more likely to report poor mental health than adults coping with just one of these challenges. A third theme emerging from our work is that adolescents are at higher risk for HIV, but don't necessarily perceive themselves to be at risk. Our findings are consistent with global data. Adolescents are accounting for 40% of all new HIV infections each year. So this is a prevention conundrum for us researchers. It's still something that we're trying to untangle. Why is it that the majority of adolescents in our communities know about HIV, but they report using condoms inconsistently? And even more concerningly, 75% or more report that they have no or little chance of being infected with HIV. We also document sexual risk emerging from the phenomenon of sugar daddies, a term that I haven't made up that's actually used in South Africa, representing the partnership between younger girls and much older male partners, and engagement in exploitative transactional sex. And what all of these three themes highlight for this group here is the sensitive nature of the data that we collect. Data on mental health, data on sex, and data on HIV. A fourth theme from our studies is the urgent need to develop family interventions to address the intersection of HIV risk and poor mental health. We know, for example, that adolescents who are experiencing mental distress may be more at risk for HIV due to lower self-efficacy in negotiating safe sex, due to poor risk perception, and also due to maladaptive emotion dysregulation strategies such as numbing through the use of alcohol and drugs during sexual encounters. We also know that when parents are experiencing mental distress, they may have more difficulty implementing positive parenting, monitoring, communicating about sex, all family aspects that play an important role in contributing to HIV prevention among young people. So a fifth theme is that our team has chosen to develop resilience-focused interventions and interventions with a preventative focus. For example, we know from the bar on your far right that the risk for poor mental health among children drastically increases when a child lives in a household where they're affected by HIV in some way, for example, living with HIV or being orphaned by AIDS, and when they're living with a parent who is in mental distress. But what we need to ask is what's happening to the group of children that are experiencing these situations but remain resilient. So much of our intervention work more recently has focused on that shift, the paradigm shift from risk to resilience. And more on that later. But what I think that this highlights is the complexity of the type of data that we collect. We collect data not only from individuals, but from multiple individuals in a family. We also collect data that is longitudinal. Because intervention outcomes can only really be assessed through repeat assessments, we need to follow multiple members of that family over time in South Africa. This is complex. You'll see a little bit later on why. Partly it's also complex because of the rates of high migratory labor that occur among these families. The other complexity is that we gather different types of data. So here you can see from our most recent study, we gathered qualitative data from families, asking them to help us understand this concept of resilience. So we said, we asked them, define resilience for us. Tell us what that means for you. And families came up with ways of explaining resilience. Families describe strategies such as reciprocity, mutual care, social support, and generosity, shown in the quotes here. And one of the most exciting strategies that families described was this concept of a family meeting. A family meeting could be used to solve difficult family challenges, to cope with problems, and it often involving a wider network of the family group. So what this final theme highlights is the diversity of data that we need to capture. We need to capture often audio data along with written data. So what I would like to do is spend the remaining time together talking about the evolution of our data systems. And this, I think, is driven by what the presenters talked about earlier this morning. I'm coming to data systems really from the perspective of what I'm seeing in the field, the kind of challenges that I'm encountering. And so this conference has been really fascinating for me to hear kind of that bigger perspective of data systems. And it's important that I think we meet in the middle and see both sides of those. So what I would like to talk about is some of the challenges that we faced in formulating our data systems. And the challenges will be shown in blue titles on the slides. But then I also want to present some of the solutions that our team is working towards. I think it's a constant work in progress, and those solutions are shown in green titles. So one thing to say is that our team has rapidly moved away from paper data collection. I know that in the US that seems like such an obvious thing to move away from, but in our field context, we actually stuck with paper data collection for a really long time. It was because of the particular logistical context that we faced. It was also because of the high rates of crime in the communities that we worked in. Carrying electronic mobile systems for data collection just simply wasn't that safe. So it's taken our team a really long time to move away from paper for those reasons. So the first major data systems challenge as we are moving towards an electronic system of data is the need to work across multiple sites with large teams. We always have several sites going in South Africa, and we have scientific team members that are spread across 3 countries, sometimes more. And our team ranges in size from 5 to 25 people. We also work in multiple time zones. So this means that we need to find a way to sync our systems, to minimize conflicting files, to make our files and data easily accessible across multiple study team members using real-time collaboration and at different time points in the day. So traditional methods of sending files back and forth using VPN behind a university server wall doesn't work well because of the slow internet speed in South Africa. Another major challenge was the size of files that we work with, particularly audio. So for example, all of our questionnaires take place in several of the South African official languages. In the one site that I'm working now, it takes place in both English and Xhosa. And these audio recordings of our questionnaire, which we administer audioly to participants, takes up a large amount of file space. Another great example is that we often work with large video files. So a great example of that being our documentary film that we use to disseminate findings. So here we're really coming up against the challenge that in Africa there are fewer oceanic fiber optic cables that provide internet to that continent, and that limits our broadband capacity. That's not something that I think can be changed from the top down. That's something that's a constraint that we have to work within. So we talked about Dropbox in the earlier presentation, but I'm going to explain how I'm using Dropbox. So we tried sharing drives housed at universities behind our server wall, but again, the VPN really didn't work for us. We found that establishing a secure VPN channel from South Africa drew large amounts of data, internet data, and that's what I mean by data here. And we would basically use up our internet allotment trying to establish that channel even before we could access files and folders that the team actually needed to use for data collection. So what we do is we don't place human subjects data on Dropbox, but we use Dropbox to share all sorts of other files. So for example, we use it to share our consent and assent forms that are not filled out yet. We use that to share our operations manual. We use it to share the audio files that our translator will record, audio files of the questions that we're asking and the answer options as part of the survey collection process, and we share those files on Dropbox. But of course, we know that cloud storage such as Dropbox doesn't offer the level of protection needed for the kind of work that we do. So we settled on a combination of a cloud-based server such as Dropbox combined with a security system that sits like a fence or a net on top of Dropbox. In our case, we use a system called Encrypted Cloud. And these two complementary software programs allow us to host large files, multiple folders that are easily accessible at any time to any team member. I want to make really clear that I'm not endorsing one software system versus another. I think the takeaway message here is the strategies that we're using. But I will say that all of the systems that we chose are focused on free software or low-cost software. Because as an investigator, what we are interested in is maximizing the use of valuable grant dollars. And we don't want our data systems to take up all of that budget. So let me tell you a little bit about the security features that we looked for. We looked for a security feature that would double encrypt our files, both in upload and download. We looked for a system that would compress large sizes of files. So for example, audio and visual files. We looked for a program that had different levels of security. For example, Encrypted Cloud lets our investigative team decide which file should be password protected. The program lets us decide who should access files and folders. And we can have different levels of security, options for deletions, copies, changes, etc. Importantly, it allows our investigative team to wipe all data from local machines in the case of theft and loss. Again, not human subjects data, but there are other files on there that we want to protect. And the files are automatically backed up so that recovery can also occur. Another challenge that we've encountered in terms of computing and data systems has been local staff capacity. Let me explain a little bit more. We make an effort to invest in local staff rather than bring in staff from the USA to South Africa. There are a couple of reasons for this. In the communities that we work, there are rates of unemployment as high as 50%. And we think that one of the real ethical complexities is we think that there's an ethical obligation to hire from these local communities. But it's an ethical complexity because it means that we need to spend more time and resources often training our team. That being said, our local team members are the ones that really have expertise in the local communities. They show us how to navigate local politics. They show us how to work in difficult logistical challenges of field work. They show us how to navigate all of those things. But what this means is that we need a lot of capacity building around simply computing as well as data systems. And the way that we get around this is we create user manuals for everything. So we create very detailed visual user manuals on how to log onto computers, how to log into our software, how to use our data systems, how to turn off computers, etc. And inevitably, things always go wrong. So we also put onto every computer that we work with in every site remote access, and we use a program called TeamViewer. And this allows us to tap into those local computers from any site and correct things if things go awry. So I'd like to also highlight some of the special data collection considerations that shape the type of systems that we utilize. First, I want to talk about the population that we work with. We work with participants that have very low rates of literacy. This is due to the historical legacy of uneven access to primary education during apartheid. So as such, we use visual questionnaires to increase the accuracy of data collection. Here I show a snapshot of how we ask about household economic assets. We show the question in words, we show a picture visual, and we also have an interview administrator read that question out loud to participants. But what this means in terms of data systems is that we have to choose an electronic data system that's capable of displaying high-resolution images. Similarly, we use visual data to engage our child participants. Here on the left, you can see a snapshot of what we call our journey booklet. This is the experience or journey that families experience as they receive our experimental intervention and go through the repeat assessments to see if the intervention works. It essentially maps out their experience of our study visually. And this is much more child-friendly than providing a 13 to 15-year-old with a written summary of what assessments you're going to do with them and when. Ultimately, what this allows us to do is to ensure that they understand that the true process of assent and consent. You know, it's not just the signing of that form, it's that true process of consent and assent that's especially important to us as investigators working with children. And then on the right, what you can see is the design of a child-friendly questionnaire designed by my colleague, Dr. Kluver, along with our teen advisory group. We did copy the layout of the popular teen magazine 17, so I think you can probably see that there. But what I think these pictures highlight is the challenge of needing to embed visual images, again, into our data system. Good visual images are about good data collection techniques. We also need to capture visual images that take up a large volume of electronic data. And here, again, we don't do this in Dropbox. I'll explain what system we use to collect this human participant data. But the need to capture visual data is critical for working with children. Often, children in our studies can visually represent what they're experiencing much clearer through a drawing than in a written questionnaire. So here's a drawing done by one of our child participants. She's describing her experience of caring for a parent sick with HIV. She shows how she takes her mom to the clinic in a wheelbarrow because they don't have other means for transport. She also shows how she brings her mom water and food to take HIV treatment medication when her mom is sick and can't get out of bed. And these image files are large. We have to handle hundreds of these images at a rapid rate. They're coming into our system quickly. And here's where I think our team is starting to think about big data analytic techniques. This is something very new to us, but this idea of the 5 V's in big data: volume, variety, veracity, velocity, and value. So we're really trying to now wrap our heads around how do we take these multiple types of data coming in on the family, audio, visual, written, and how do we synthesize that in a rigorous way, quickly, in real time? So what do we use? So here's where we get to our low-cost software collection platform. We looked for a software platform that would allow us to do mobile data collection. We wanted cost to be a major consideration. We wanted to be able to capture image and audio. We looked at a lot of really great options, and we chose Survey2Go, but other great options that we explored included Magpie, QDS, and Illume, depending on needs. And one of our biggest concerns, of course, is protecting the sensitive human subjects data that we collect. In part, this concern for security and protection has to do with the characteristics of the study communities that we work in. So here are media articles from the communities that we worked. And what I think these media articles highlight is the particular security challenges that we face. I think you can kind of see from these media articles why we chose to stay with paper for so long. We were afraid that mobile data collection would put our team in danger. We were afraid that that might put participants in danger. So we wanted to go about the process of shifting from paper to electronic data systems very carefully. So here is our strategy. We use redundant security protocols. For example, we protect all of our mobile data collection phones with passwords and usernames. We require a second set of login credentials to access the data collection software. We chose Survey2Go not only because it has enterprise-level firewall, it protects two-way data flows, it has encryption, but also because the data is sent to Amazon servers securely so that that data isn't stored on the local phone. It's sent away immediately after it's been collected. The softwares that we looked for allowed us to grant various levels of security, to delineate rights based on data in the project. It allowed us to have multiple users, allowed us to manage storage of data, manage access rights, manage viewing rights. And this also importantly includes the ability for our project team to delete and wipe all data from the phone in the case of theft. In talking about redundant security protocols, something else that we have on all of our phones is on the phone itself, the ability to lock, wipe, and ring the phone remotely. So my team tested this recently when I was in South Africa on Sunday, which I was okay with, except it happened very late at night, but I was quite amazed. My data team at Brown was able to remotely locate me and show me a map of where I was. And they were also able to ring the phone at a shrieking high volume, which I could only turn off with my username and password. So the reason this is important, of course, is that if the phone is stolen, we're going to try to recover it. And for that criminal, I think having a phone that is ringing incessantly that they can't shut off is also a great deterrent. Our third redundant security protocol has to be the recognition that theft is very possible. And so something else that we use is that we do not have accounts on our phones. Instead, we use a pay-as-you-go system. So we top up our phones with limited amounts of data. We top up our phones with limited amounts of minutes. And these are township stores. They're container stores where you can buy top-up data and top-up minutes. So as our staff run out of data and minutes to collect data, they go to one of these container stores to buy additional top-up data and minutes. So the final aspect that I want to talk about is some of the data collection challenges. Some of these I think are unique to South Africa, but not all. So we collect highly sensitive behavioral data from our subjects. You can see some of the questions that we ask of children and parents. They're very explicit, they're very sensitive, and you can imagine that if an interviewer were to ask you this question as a child, you might not get an honest answer. The issue of social desirability bias, where participants might not give you their actual answer because of embarrassment. And this is really critical to the type of research that we do. We're looking at health outcomes that continue to be highly stigmatized: HIV, sex, mental illness, etc. And the other piece is that, on record I suppose I'm saying this, is that at our institutions, we often get questions about privacy of interviewing participants. And sometimes I'll get questions such as, well, where's the private clinic room that you're going to interview your participant in? And what I try to say is that that is not the context that we work in. We work in communities where I met a family of 13 that lived in a shack and they slept in rotating shifts. There's only one room of that house. So instead, we try to use strategies to protect privacy in other ways. For example, we lower our voice and we take participants to a more private space, in this case underneath a tree, or out at our field site. This is the Kailicha Football for Hope field site where we recruited some of our participants. So we try to use other strategies to protect privacy. And here, electronic data collection systems really function to help us. So we use a system called audio computer assisted self-interviewing. What this is, some of you may be familiar with this, but what it is we have recordings of our questions and answer options. And then in the mobile phone that we're using to collect data, the headphones are plugged in and the participant listens to that question and answer option. They enter the responses themselves. So the interviewer isn't necessarily saying that question or looking at their responses. And this diminishes the bias that comes along with social desirability bias. Another challenge that we have encountered is working in very remote field sites. I mean, the site that we worked was a World UNESCO Heritage Site. It is beautiful, but let me tell you, it is very difficult to work in for a number of reasons. And it was difficult. One example is that we worked in these tidal lakes. You can actually see the traditional Venda fishing traps. And as the tides kind of go in and out, fish are caught. But what we needed to do is we needed to wait for the tide to diminish so that we could wade across the lake to access the remote village on the other side to collect data. And this was dangerous for a lot of reasons, one being that there were hippos in that lake. We had a lot of paper disasters in that lake. We dropped questionnaires that were paper. They got wet. A lot of challenges. So what I want to emphasize here is that mobile data systems really serve us very well. But it's not necessarily the biggest or most expensive device that we want. We want mobility. So often we go with the cheapest phone and the smallest phone that gives us that software capability at full functioning. So as we look for mobile data systems and software, we thought a lot about flexibility. We wanted multiple device capability, phone, tablet, computer. If we're going to make that investment, we wanted to make sure that we could work in all those formats. We looked for multiple platforms, Windows, Android, iOS. The other challenge that we've encountered, especially in our intervention research, where we have to do repeat assessments, is the issue of tracking and tracing participants for repeat measures. So I show some snapshots, a faraway view of Kailicha Township, where I was last week. And it's difficult to work in for tracking and tracing because, as you can see, the informal shacks are closely clustered together. There are no discernible paths. There certainly aren't road names or roads, and there are no house addresses. And on your left, bottom left, is a close-up view of what it looks like as you kind of walk through that informal shack settlement. And what this means is that technology has also served to really help us track and trace participants. We track and trace using the Survey2Go system, which allows us to capture GPS automatically, and because that's identifiable information, it's protected by the Survey2Go data systems. But I will say that our systems need refinement and more development. So, for example, we continue to have challenges tracking and tracing using GPS. Part of this has to do with the metal sheeting on the roofs and walls of the homes that we work in. This really blocks access to satellite signal. And here in our rural site, you can actually see my team member, Zolani, climbing a tree to try to get a better GPS signal. Behind him, you can see that there's very heavy African bush. And when you're standing in that bush, it's very difficult to actually get a lock. So, I think that some of our data system challenges remain, and we need to find clever ways to get around them. So we've spoken previously about the challenge of internet and limited undersea cables to Africa and what that means for broadband. But what we experienced last week in Cape Town was also limited electricity, which of course shuts off internet. Part of the legacy in South Africa has been an electrical grid that can't actually handle the whole population. And so what happens is the electricity company will shut off electricity to different sections of the city at various times so that the grid doesn't get overloaded. So one of the challenges that we encountered is unsteady or not stable electricity, which knocks out internet, and also undependable electricity. In the rural site, this is taken from a rural home that we worked at. They're really lucky. I mean, a lot of homes had no electricity at all, but this home actually had solar panel. So what this meant for our electronic data systems is to think about offline capability. Not only did we think about systems that allowed us to have offline data collection capability, but we wanted data systems that took that data very quickly and had a fast loading speed. So the software that we chose, and other softwares do work like this too, is that it sends the data at the very beginning, you collect the data, and then it sends it at the very end. And that allowed us not to spend very valuable grant dollars on having data on the whole time, which is so cost prohibitive in South Africa, but also allowed us to kind of protect that data and send it away as soon as we are done. Another consideration, of course, is the choice of devices with long battery life, because you really are not quite sure when your next electrical charge is going to be. So, of course, things go wrong, and here you can see that similar to our office-based computers, we work with remote troubleshooting on our mobile data collection devices in the field. And there are many softwares out there. This is just the one that we happen to use. This software allows you to tap into the phone from any location in the world. if you have security access, and it allows you to do that from a computer linked to the software or from any kind of web accessible location. So I'd like to leave time for questions, and I want to end by thanking my research collaborators and my mentors, including my community collaborators and NIH for this generous funding of these studies, and especially to recognize my data team, who are really the experts here, and they're led by Ms. Suzanne Sales, Mr. Tim Souza, and Mr. Rick Smith at Brown University School of Public Health. And I'll end with the motto that really drives our thinking about data systems. We think about data systems in a couple of ways: that digital devices add great value in ensuring rigor and speed of data collection and analysis, but that, especially in our context, they have to be rolled out with a great deal of care. We focus a lot on redundant security systems given the sensitivity of the data that we collect and that we work with human participants. And we think a lot about expense. Largest, latest, most expensive is definitely not a good fit for our kinds of studies. We focus much more on what they offer us. I think what good data systems offer is the potential and ability to automate data collection and more powerful analytics. But evolution, of course, is the key word in our team, data evolution. We're constantly in the process of trying to refine and improve our approach. We constantly are asking, how can we improve our data system based on what we encounter in the field? And how can this improve the rigor of our research, ultimately in the service of the health of families who are living in these underserved communities? So I'll end there, and thank you so much. Take questions? Sure.
Any questions? Does anybody have a question? I can bring the mic over. I'm just interested in, you talked briefly about you need to quickly clean up your data. Do you have any tools that you like to use?
So here's where I think we use more run-of-the-mill kind of academic software to analyze. I'm not sure that there have been innovations around that, but what I will say is that electronic data collection, which isn't new to this group, has really allowed us to make sure that the data coming in is of very high quality. So skip patterns and other pieces of administering the questionnaire are much improved because we use an electronic system. So what I will say is that our data systems have allowed us to analyze data more rapidly because of the logic that's embedded into the data collection process.
I'm wondering if you could share, I know that there are institutions that have on their websites for data security and protection things that we can't use. Like around there's a position statement that says we shouldn't use Dropbox. And my criticism was that our institutions are very good at telling us what we can't use. They're not very good at telling us what we can use. And you had to invest a lot of time and energy and funds in evaluating these products with your data team. What can libraries and our partners in CS and research computing do to make your work in the global field better?
So what I will say is that Brown has been incredibly responsive. They never tell me no. They always say that they'll think about it and they'll explore. And almost always they help me come up with a solution. I think one thing from my perspective as an investigator and as I talk to other scientists around me, one thing that we struggle with is we are finding these systems piecemeal. So here's where I think librarians play an incredibly vital role in trying to centralize the process of choosing software, in trying to centralize the systems of setting up good data systems. And I think if I thought about my wish list as an investigator, I wish that there was a dedicated data team for scientists doing similar work. I wish that there were centralized places that investigators could go to understand what softwares work particularly well in underserved communities with these kind of complex data collection issues. Of course, those are not all the same, but I do think that there are some common themes in collecting data in low-resource communities, and to try to centralize some of that information so that for every project we don't spend effort and time trying to research that all over again in our different silos. I think what we've also learned from the process at Brown is that you need an interdisciplinary team. You need academic librarians, you need the computing services, you need your financial team to come on board and help you make those purchases. You need a really great, competent data team to help you think through those issues. And my role is small, right? I mean, I go into the field and come back with all these problems, and this is the interdisciplinary team that really helps me solve it. So I think also this idea of interdisciplinary teams is really the next step, I think, towards our data evolution, and finding ways to make that happen at a systemic level at the university would be incredibly helpful.
Any other questions?
Mine's not really a question, it's a comment. I just want to say I'm humbled by the challenges you face in your data collection. I'm a geologist and I thought we had it bad. But we don't very often have to deal with our equipment being stolen. or us in data.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I was just wondering if you're going to be writing up any kind of paper on all your solutions, because I know people at different schools, it would be great to have other researchers be able to find solutions and us librarians be able to point to, oh yeah, this school's figured it out. Go look at theirs.
You know,
plug you directly.
I really think we should. We wrote a paper. I can't remember the exact title, but it might have been something along the lines of snakes, Satanists, and something else. Fieldwork challenges. I can't remember the title, but so rarely do I think investigative teams write up the process. And we kind of did this paper on snakes and Satanists and other things as our first kind of process paper, and it was so widely read. We would go to conferences and people would ask us about that particular fieldwork experience. You know, people love to ask us for that article. So I think that your point is really valuable. We need to write up more about the process, and you know, because the data evolution of our team has been such a work in progress, I'm starting to realize that we'll never get to a good endpoint where it feels like, okay, it's done and we can write it up and we know all the answers. But I do think we need to step back perhaps and write some of this up. So I'll take that back. Thank you so much.
Like a website or blog.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, so that's something that I think I'm going to really turn to Andrew to help with in terms of preservation. You know, our team does, because of the interdisciplinary nature of our work and the multiple sites, we do have a pretty good data management plan in place, and we also have plans regarding how we'll share data, how people use that data, you know, the timeline for it. But I think we need to think carefully about preservation, and that's something where, again, the interdisciplinary team would be of really great help. I think that maybe other PIs are more sophisticated, but I know that when I hear that, I just think, I don't know, is it as simple as putting aside money and thinking about the systems to preserve? So that's where I'll be turning to Andrew. He'll be hearing from me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thanks so much.